Picture this, you're standing in a grocery store and you pick up something that looks good, maybe a slightly nicer cut of meat, maybe the name brand cereal instead of the generic one, and you just put it in the cart. No mental calculation, no quick check of your bank balance, no quiet anxiety about whether this one purchase is going to create a problem by Thursday. You just pick it up and keep walking. That moment sounds completely ordinary. For most people it is, but if you've spent any significant portion of your adult life living paycheck to paycheck, and right now roughly 78% of American workers do, that moment in the grocery store represents something that is anything but ordinary. It represents a fundamental shift in how your brain is operating. A shift most people don't recognize when it's happening to them. A shift that, once it occurs, changes not just how you shop, but how you think, how you work, how you negotiate, and how you make every financial decision for the rest of your life. Today we're going to break down exactly what that shift is, why it happens, what the neuroscience behind it actually says, and most importantly, the specific number where it begins. My name is Lukazo, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and the very specific neurological reasons why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others stay trapped in the same financial patterns for decades despite genuinely trying to escape them. If you want to understand the real mechanics of why financial security feels so different from financial struggle, not just emotionally but physiologically, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up changing how you think about money. Quick disclaimer, nothing here is financial advice. This is purely educational. Let's get into the science. Here is something most financial content completely ignores. Being broke is not just a financial condition. It is a cognitive condition. Research published in the journal Science by economists Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir demonstrated something that upended how behavioral economists think about poverty and financial struggle. When your mind is consumed by financial scarcity, when you are constantly calculating whether you have enough to make it to the next paycheck, your effective cognitive capacity measurably decreases. The mental bandwidth consumed by financial anxiety produces a cognitive deficit equivalent in magnitude to losing 13 IQ points, not permanently, but persistently for as long as the scarcity condition continues, 13 IQ points. That is the cognitive penalty for living paycheck to paycheck, not because people in financial struggle are less intelligent, because their minds are constantly occupied by a problem that demands immediate attention and never fully resolves. Every dollar that comes in is already allocated before it arrives. Every unexpected expense is a crisis, and the mental load of managing that reality every single day crowds out the cognitive resources that would otherwise be available for the decisions that could actually change the situation. This is what makes financial struggle so self-reinforcing. The condition itself impairs the very thinking you need to escape it. And understanding this is the first step to understanding what actually changes when you cross the threshold out of it. There is a specific dollar amount where the cognitive shift begins. And it is not $1 million. It is not 6 figures. It is not even what most financial advisors would call a fully funded emergency fund. The research points to a number that might surprise you, $2,000. Vanguard's financial well-being research found that having just $2,000 in emergency savings produces a 21% increase in measured financial well-being, the largest single-factor improvement they identified in their entire dataset. $2,000. That is less than most people spend on a vacation. But that small buffer is enough to begin shifting the brain out of what psychologists call survival mode, the cognitive state where every decision is filtered through the lens of immediate threat. But $2,000 is just the beginning. The threshold where the shift becomes genuinely transformative, where your relationship with money, with work, with risk, and with opportunity fundamentally changes, is what research identifies as 3 to 6 months of living expenses. For most Americans, that number lands somewhere between $8,000 and $25,000. Let's call it the $10,000 to $20,000 range. And here's what happens in your brain when you get there. First, your cortisol levels drop. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone. Chronic financial scarcity is one of the most consistent triggers of elevated cortisol. It activates the same threat response systems as physical danger. When you cross the threshold into genuine financial buffer, your cortisol response to everyday financial events decreases measurably. Your car needs a repair. Your cortisol spikes, then drops because you know you can handle it. This physical change in your stress response is not metaphorical. It is biochemical, and it has cascading effects on your sleep, your immune function, your decision-making quality, and your relationships. Second, your time horizon expands when you are in survival mode. The cognitive research shows that your brain naturally compresses its planning horizon toward the immediate. You think about this week, this paycheck, this bill. The financial future beyond the next 30 days is psychologically inaccessible, not because you don't care about it, but because the present emergency demands all available attention. When you have a buffer, the planning horizon expands. You begin to think in months, then years, then decades. This is not a personality change. It is a direct consequence of your brain being released from the pressure of immediate survival. Third, your relationship with risk changes, not recklessly, strategically. When you have no buffer, every risk feels existential because it might be. Taking a new job with a higher ceiling but a 90-day probationary period is too dangerous when you are 3 weeks from a crisis. Investing even a small amount feels irresponsible when any disruption could cascade into missed rent. The rational response to genuine financial fragility is risk aversion. But the cruel paradox is that escaping financial fragility almost always requires taking calculated risks, negotiating, changing jobs, starting something, investing. The buffer is what makes those risks rational instead of reckless. Here's what most people completely miss about this phenomenon, and this is the part of the conversation that almost nobody has. The shift I've been describing is not just about having money, it is about the identity that comes with having proven to yourself that you can accumulate and protect money. These are two different things, and the second one is more powerful than the first. When you build an emergency fund, when you consistently save a portion of every paycheck over many months against the pull of every competing desire and expense, you are not just accumulating dollars. You are demonstrating to yourself a capacity for delayed gratification that the research consistently identifies as the single strongest behavioral predictor of long-term financial success. Every month you maintain the savings habit. You are reinforcing a self-concept. You are the type of person who prioritizes the future over the present. That identity shift ripples outward. You start noticing financial decisions you were making unconsciously, subscriptions you forgot about, spending patterns you had rationalized. The mental clarity that comes from reduced financial stress frees cognitive resources that had been perpetually occupied, and those freed resources get redirected toward optimization. People who build emergency funds often report, almost universally, a sudden acceleration in their financial awareness that feels almost automatic. It is not automatic, it is the previously occupied cognitive bandwidth becoming available. There is also something researchers call the confidence channel. When you know you have a financial buffer, you walk into negotiations differently. You ask for the raise because the worst outcome, being told no and feeling awkward, is survivable. You push back on the unreasonable deadline because your manager's displeasure is uncomfortable but not catastrophic. You leave the job that is slowly destroying you because you have enough runway to find something better. This is not courage. This is the rational recalculation of risk that happens when the downside of any given decision is no longer existential. So what is the actual path from paycheck to the threshold? The research is clear that the method matters less than the consistency. Whether you use a high-yield savings account, automate a fixed transfer on payday, or manually move money every month, the mechanism is less important than the habit becoming automatic. The goal is to remove the decision from your active cognition. Every time you have to actively decide to save, you create an opportunity for a competing priority to win. Automate it even if the amount feels embarrassingly small. $50 per paycheck eventually becomes $1,300 per year. $1,300 eventually becomes $2,000. $2,000 is where the first measurable cognitive shift begins. But here's the warning that most people miss after hearing all of this, and it is critical. The moment you hit a savings milestone, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, there's a powerful psychological pull to reward yourself by spending it. The discipline that built the buffer produces a feeling of earned permission to release it. Resist this with everything you have. The buffer is not a reward for good behavior. It is the foundation on which every subsequent financial decision will be built. Spending it resets not just the dollar amount but the cognitive state. You are back in survival mode with all the neurological penalties that come with it. The shift out of paycheck to paycheck living is not primarily a financial achievement. It is a neurological one. And the people who protect that shift, who understand that the buffer is not a destination but a foundation, are the type of people who find that every financial goal after the first one gets progressively easier. Not because the math changes, because their brain does. If this gave you a different framework for thinking about why financial security feels different from financial struggle, hit the like button and subscribe. We break down the real mechanics behind wealth every single week. And if you want to understand the specific order in which to invest your money once that buffer is in place, that is exactly what the next video covers. The research makes the mechanics concrete. A 2023 JPMorgan Chase Institute analysis of household financial data found that families with at least 1 month of liquid savings, roughly $3,000 to $6,000 for most households, were significantly less likely to miss bill payments, take on high-interest debt, or experience housing instability during income disruptions compared to households with equivalent incomes but minimal savings buffers. The buffer mattered more than the income level. 2 households with identical paychecks but different savings buffers had dramatically different financial stability outcomes when disruptions hit. The Federal Reserve's annual survey of consumer finances consistently shows that the single largest predictor of wealth accumulation over a 10-year period is not income, not education, and not investment sophistication. It is the presence or absence of an emergency savings buffer at the start of the period. People who entered the decade with a financial buffer accumulated wealth at roughly 3 times the rate of people with equivalent incomes, but no buffer, not because the buffer itself compounded, but because the buffer changed every financial decision that followed. Consider what that means practically. The person who enters 2025 with $15,000 in an emergency fund and $50,000 in income is not just financially safer than the person with $0 in savings and $50,000 in income. They are operating in a fundamentally different cognitive and behavioral reality. Every decision they make over the next 10 years will be made with lower cortisol, a longer planning horizon, a more accurate assessment of risk, and a stronger self-concept as someone who manages money well. The downstream effects of those differences compound far beyond the original $15,000.